"Sir, this is a restricted facility. You need to turn around and exit through the visitor center." The words cut through the main corridor of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, with the particular brand of authority that comes from someone wearing a uniform and standing at a checkpoint. Officer Marcus Webb, 31 years old and 3 years into his position as a civilian security contractor for the Department of Defense, stood with his arms crossed and his expression showing a mixture of annoyance and condescension. Before him, looking slightly confused and holding a worn leather briefcase, stood David Chen, 78 years old, wearing khaki pants that had seen better days, a cardigan sweater with a small coffee stain on the front, and comfortable walking shoes. His white hair was slightly disheveled, his reading glasses hung from a chain around his neck, and to Officer Webb's critical eye, he looked exactly like a lost elderly tourist who had somehow wandered past the visitor screening area and into restricted Pentagon corridors. The Pentagon, one of the world's most secure buildings and headquarters of the United States Department of Defense, did not tolerate security breaches of any kind. Webb took his job seriously, perhaps too seriously according to some of his colleagues who found his approach unnecessarily aggressive, but Webb believed that security was black and white, with no room for gray areas or judgment calls. Rules were rules, and part of that job was preventing unauthorized personnel from accessing restricted areas. What he saw before him was clearly an unauthorized elderly civilian who needed to be redirected before this became a bigger security incident. The fact that it was a Tuesday morning, typically one of the quieter times in the building, made the presence of this confused old man even more suspicious in Webb's mind. "Sir, did you hear me?" Webb repeated, his voice growing sharper and louder, drawing the attention of several Pentagon staff members walking past in the corridor. "You cannot be in this area. I need you to turn around right now and I'll escort you back to the public entrance. If you resist, I will call for additional security personnel, and this will become a much bigger problem for you." David blinked behind his glasses and looked around the corridor with an expression that seemed more nostalgic than confused, his pale blue eyes taking in details that clearly held personal meaning. "I'm sorry, young man. I was trying to find the Eisenhower corridor. Is this still B ring? They've changed some of the signage since I was last here." The question only confirmed Webb's assessment. This was definitely a lost tourist using terminology he'd probably read in a guidebook or heard on some Pentagon tour. The building's complex structure of 5 concentric rings connected by radial corridors was notoriously confusing even for people who worked there daily. Webb had been lost himself during his first month on the job, wandering the seemingly endless corridors until a helpful Navy commander had pointed him in the right direction. But this was different. This was a security breach, and Webb was determined to handle it by the book. "Sir, I don't know how you got past the security checkpoints, but you don't have authorization to be here. This is B ring, and it's a restricted area. I'm going to need to see some identification and then escort you out of the building. And I need you to put that briefcase down on the floor right now so I can inspect it." The demand was delivered with the kind of aggressive authority that made several nearby civilian employees exchange uncomfortable glances. One of them, a senior analyst named Patricia Winters who had worked in the Pentagon for 23 years, slowed her pace and pulled out her phone, sensing that something was about to go very wrong. She recognized David Chen immediately, having attended several of his lectures on structural engineering over the years, and she knew that Officer Webb was making a catastrophic error. But before she could intervene, Webb had already escalated the situation. He pulled out his radio, preparing to call for backup. A confused elderly person in restricted Pentagon corridors could quickly escalate into a serious security incident, and he wanted additional officers present to document this properly. His finger was on the radio button when David slowly reached into his cardigan pocket, moving with the deliberate slowness that comes with advanced age and a lifetime of learning to move carefully around nervous young people with authority. He pulled out a battered leather wallet that looked like it had been carried daily since the Carter administration, the brown leather worn smooth and soft from decades of being sat on, pulled out and stuffed back into pockets. The wallet itself was an artifact of a different era, when men carried cash and important documents in genuine leather rather than slim card holders. He extracted what appeared to be a standard military retiree ID card and handed it to Webb with fingers that showed a slight tremor. The tremor wasn't from nervousness, but from age and perhaps a touch of essential tremor that affected many elderly people. Webb examined the card with the thoroughness his training demanded, holding it up to the fluorescent light as if checking for forgeries. The ID showed David's photograph, taken perhaps 5 years earlier when he had slightly less white hair, identified him as a retired Department of Defense civilian employee, and indicated he had separated from service in 1995. The card was valid and legitimate, showing no signs of tampering or forgery. But it was a retiree ID, not an active access badge with the chip and magnetic stripe that current Pentagon employees used. "Sir, this doesn't give you access to restricted areas. This is a retiree ID. It's only valid for base privileges like the commissary and exchange, not for entering secure Pentagon corridors. How did you even get past the security desk at the entrance? Did you bypass screening entirely? Because if you did, that's a federal offense that could result in arrest and prosecution." The threat hung in the air, harsh and unnecessary. Patricia Winters had stopped walking entirely now, standing 20 feet away and watching with her phone in hand, ready to intervene or record depending on how this played out. She could see David's patient expression, the kind of tolerance that comes from someone who has dealt with this type of misunderstanding before and knows that anger or defensiveness will only make things worse. Before David could formulate a response that might de-escalate the situation, a voice called out from down the corridor with the tone of someone who had just spotted a potential disaster in progress. "Officer Webb, is there a problem here?" The speaker was Colonel Sarah Mitchell, 52 years old, assigned to the Joint Staff and walking toward them with 2 junior officers trailing behind her like ducklings following their mother. She wore Army service uniform with colonel's eagles on her shoulders that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and a chest full of ribbons that indicated a distinguished career including deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Her face showed the kind of quiet competence that came from decades of military service, and her expression suggested she had just recognized something that Webb had completely missed. Webb straightened slightly, instinctively responding to the presence of a field-grade officer, even though as a civilian contractor he wasn't technically required to show military courtesies. "Ma'am, this civilian somehow bypassed security screening and I found him in a restricted corridor. He only has a retiree ID, no current access badge. I was just about to escort him out of the building and file a security incident report. I may need to contact Pentagon police to document this properly." Colonel Mitchell's eyes had locked on David, and her expression shifted from curious to something approaching shock, then quickly to barely controlled anger at what she was witnessing. She stopped walking so suddenly that her 2 junior officers nearly bumped into her from the unexpected halt, and one of them, a young second lieutenant who had been commissioned less than a year ago, stumbled slightly before catching himself. "Mr. Chen," Mitchell said, her voice carrying a note of disbelief mixed with respect that made Webb's confident expression finally begin to crack. "Sir, what are you doing here? I didn't know you were visiting the building today." Webb looked between the colonel and David, confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere and the tone of profound respect in Mitchell's voice. Why was she calling this random old man sir with that particular inflection that suggested genuine deference rather than simple courtesy? Mitchell knew this man. And more importantly, why did she seem angry at Webb rather than appreciative that he had caught a security breach? David's weathered face lit up with recognition, his pale blue eyes brightening behind his reading glasses. "Sarah? Sarah Mitchell? Good Lord, last time I saw you, you were a brand new second lieutenant working in the engineering annex, couldn't have been more than 23 years old. You were helping us review the structural calculations for the renovation project. I remember you caught an error in the load-bearing calculations that would have been expensive to fix later. Smart young officer, I told your commander at the time." 15 years ago, sir," Mitchell confirmed, approaching with her hand extended, which David shook warmly. His grip was still firm despite his age, the handshake of someone who had spent decades in professional environments where first impressions mattered. "I didn't know you still came to the building. It's wonderful to see you again." "I don't usually," David admitted with a slight shrug that showed his age in the careful way he moved his shoulders. My daughter tells me I should stay home and enjoy retirement. But they're unveiling the new renovation plans tomorrow, the next phase of updates, and they invited me to preview them tonight. They wanted my input on some of the structural modifications they're planning. My escort was supposed to meet me at the main entrance at 0900 hours, but I got tired of waiting after 20 minutes, so I thought I'd walk down to the old office on my own. Apparently, I got a bit turned around. The corridors look different than I remember, or maybe my memory isn't what it used to be. Webb cleared his throat, a sound that came out more nervous than authoritative. Ma'am, with all due respect, this gentleman has a retiree ID but no access badge for restricted areas. Building security protocols require all personnel in restricted corridors to have current access authorization. I was following proper procedure by Officer Webb, Mitchell interrupted, her voice taking on an edge sharp enough to cut through steel. Do you know who you're talking to? Do you have any idea who this man is? A retired DoD civilian employee, ma'am. That's what his ID indicates. Retired in 1995 according to the card, which means he hasn't had active authorization to be in this building for 29 years. The answer was delivered with diminishing confidence as Webb began to understand that he had fundamentally misread the situation. Mitchell looked at Webb with an expression that suggested she was about to deliver information that would fundamentally change his understanding of the situation and possibly haunt him for the rest of his career. She took a breath, clearly trying to control her anger at what she was witnessing, then began speaking with the precision of someone delivering a briefing. This is David Chen. He's the principal structural engineer who designed the Pentagon renovation project from 1991 to 2001, a 10-year undertaking that modernized this entire facility. He's also the lead engineer who designed the reinforcement systems that saved hundreds of lives when American Airlines Flight 77 hit this building on September 11, 2001. The words hung in the corridor like a physical force, stopping conversations and causing several Pentagon employees to pause in their tracks. Webb felt his confident posture falter as he processed what the colonel had just said, his brain struggling to reconcile the image of the confused old man in the stained cardigan with the gravity of what Mitchell was describing. More specifically, Mitchell continued, her voice growing sharper and carrying further down the corridor as more staff members stopped to listen. The corridor you're standing in right now, the one you're trying to escort Mr. Chen out of, that's the Chen corridor. It was officially designated in 2011 in recognition of his contributions to this building's design and the lives his work saved on 9/11. You've been working security in this corridor for 3 years, and you never bothered to read the dedication plaque that you walk past every single day. Webb's face had gone pale, the color draining as the full magnitude of his error crashed down on him like a physical weight. He looked at the corridor walls as if seeing them for the first time, his eyes searching for and finally finding the brass plaques he had walked past thousands of times without really reading them. One of them, mounted prominently at the corridor junction about 15 feet away, read in engraved letters, Chen Corridor, dedicated to David Chen, Principal Engineer, Pentagon Renovation Project, 1991 to 2001. In recognition of structural innovations that saved lives on September 11, 2001. The two junior officers with Colonel Mitchell had stopped several feet back, their expressions showing they understood they were witnessing what would become a legendary story told and retold throughout the Pentagon security training classes for years to come. One of them, the young second lieutenant, was already mentally composing the email he would send to his officer basic course classmates about what he had just witnessed. David, seemingly unbothered by the entire situation and showing the kind of grace that comes from true confidence rather than ego, smiled gently at Webb. It's quite all right, son. I know I don't look like much. I'm retired now, just an old engineer who likes to check in on his old workplace occasionally. I probably should have arranged better coordination with my escort. That's my fault for being impatient. But Colonel Mitchell was not about to let this pass without ensuring the full lesson was delivered. She was a teacher at heart, having served as an instructor at West Point before her current assignment, and she recognized a teaching moment when she saw one. Officer Webb, let me educate you about Mr. Chen's not looking like much. From 1970 to 1995, he was the Defense Department's leading structural engineer. He designed reinforcement systems for over 40 military installations worldwide, from Ramstein Air Base in Germany to Camp Foster in Okinawa. In 1991, when the Pentagon renovation project began, he identified critical structural weaknesses in the original 1940s construction and designed revolutionary reinforcement systems that changed how we think about building security. She pulled out her phone and pulled up several photographs that she kept bookmarked for exactly this type of situation, having used them in previous briefings about Pentagon history. On September 11, 2001, when American Airlines Flight 77 struck the building at approximately 530 miles per hour, carrying thousands of gallons of jet fuel, Mr. Chen's reinforced structural sections absorbed the impact. The area that was hit had just been renovated according to his specifications between 1998 and 2001. The reinforced columns, blast-resistant windows, and structural redundancy systems he designed prevented a catastrophic collapse that could have killed thousands. Instead of the entire section pancaking down as the original 1940s structure would have done, his design channeled the forces and contained the damage. 125 people in the building died, which is 125 too many, but that was primarily in the immediate impact zone. Every person who survived in the surrounding areas, every person who was able to evacuate, owes their life to Mr. Chen's engineering genius. Mitchell's voice grew more intense as she continued, making sure every word landed with full impact. Furthermore, his design innovations became the standard for all Department of Defense facility hardening worldwide. Every military installation renovated since 2001 incorporates Chen's principles. Every embassy, every command center, every critical facility has benefited from his work. He holds 7 patents in structural reinforcement technology. He's received the Secretary of Defense Medal for Outstanding Public Service, the Army Decoration for Distinguished Civilian Service, the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award, and was inducted into the Defense Department Hall of Honor in 2015. There's a display case dedicated to his work in the Pentagon Library, and his original design drawings are preserved in the National Archives. Webb had been taking small steps backward during this explanation. His earlier confidence completely evaporated and replaced by genuine horror at what he had done. The full magnitude of his error was crashing down on him in waves. He had not just stopped a random elderly person, he had intercepted and attempted to forcibly remove a genuine American hero from a corridor that bore his name, in a building he had literally designed, while treating him like a criminal. The security procedures he had been so proud of following suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless compared to the basic human judgment he had failed to exercise. "Colonel," Webb began, his voice unsteady and showing the first signs of genuine panic, "I had no idea. I sincerely apologize. I was just following security protocols exactly as written, and this gentleman only presented a retiree ID with no current access badge, and the procedures manual clearly states, you were following protocols while completely failing to exercise the judgment and situational awareness that should accompany those protocols." Mitchell cut him off, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in combat. "Security protocols are important, yes, but so is knowing the building's history, recognizing people who built it, and understanding that sometimes the most important people don't carry the fanciest badges. Mr. Chen has been coming to this building for previews and consultations for decades. Half the senior staff knows him on site. The Secretary of Defense knows him personally, and you treated him like he was trying to break into a facility he literally designed." She turned to David, her expression softening. "Sir, I apologize profusely for this incident. Your escort must have been delayed or there was a miscommunication. I'll personally walk you to the renovation preview room and ensure you're properly taken care of, and I'm filing a formal complaint about how you were treated." David waved off the concern with the gentle dismissal of someone who had lived long enough to not sweat the small stuff. "No apology necessary, Sarah." The young man was doing his job. Perhaps a bit aggressively, and perhaps without understanding the full context, But security is important. Better to be too cautious than too lax. I've always said that. He turned to Webb with a kind expression that somehow made the security officer feel even worse than Mitchell's anger had. Son, you weren't entirely wrong to question my presence. I do look like a lost old man, and I was in a restricted corridor without a visible access badge. You were trying to protect the building, which is exactly what you're paid to do. You just didn't have all the information you needed to make a proper assessment. That's a training issue, not necessarily a character flaw. But Colonel Mitchell was not as forgiving, her years of military discipline making her less tolerant of preventable errors. She pulled out her own radio, keying the microphone. This is Colonel Mitchell, J3. I need to speak with the Pentagon Force Protection Agency Shift Commander immediately. We have a situation in B Ring that requires senior leadership attention. Within 3 minutes, the corridor had transformed into an impromptu command post. Webb's supervisor arrived first, a retired Army Sergeant Major named Thomas Bradford, who took one look at the situation and immediately understood something had gone seriously wrong. Then came the Pentagon Force Protection Agency Shift Commander, a former Army Major named Rodriguez who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Behind them came a 2-star general who happened to be walking past and recognized David, stopping to pay his respects. The situation was explained in detail by Colonel Mitchell, and David found himself at the center of an impromptu receiving line of security personnel and military officers who had either heard the commotion or been summoned by radio. Webb stood off to the side, no longer part of the conversation, watching as senior military officers treated David with the profound respect he deserved. A Navy captain shared a story about serving on a ship that had been hardened using Chen's principles after 9/11. An Air Force colonel mentioned that her father had worked with David on the Ramstein renovation in the 1980s. Each person had a connection, a story, a reason to know who David Chen was. The shift commander, Rodriguez, approached Webb after speaking with David and getting the full story. His expression was stern but not unkind, the look of a senior leader about to deliver a lesson that would be remembered. Officer Webb, you're not being written up for a formal disciplinary action. Mr. Chen specifically requested that no punitive measures be taken, which speaks volumes about his character and is more grace than you probably deserve right now. But you are going to write a detailed after-action report explaining exactly what happened here, step by step, and you're going to attend a mandatory briefing on Pentagon history and significant persons who maintain access privileges. This building has living legends who walk these halls, and part of your job is knowing who they are. He paused, making sure Webb understood the weight of what he was saying, letting the silence stretch to drive the point home. David Chen is 78 years old now. He's retired, he dresses casually because he's earned the right to be comfortable, and he sometimes forgets his escort arrangements because he's been coming to this building since before you were born. But when you see an elderly Asian American man with a leather briefcase in B Ring, your first thought should be, that might be Mr. Chen, not, that's a lost tourist I need to aggressively remove. This building owes him more respect than what you showed him today, and frankly, you should be embarrassed. Patricia Winters, the analyst who had recognized David from the beginning, approached Colonel Mitchell with her phone. Ma'am, I recorded part of the interaction. If you need it for training purposes or the incident report, I'm happy to provide it. Mitchell nodded. Thank you, Patricia. That may be useful. This is exactly the kind of scenario we should be training people to avoid. As the small crowd began to disperse, and Colonel Mitchell personally escorted David toward his destination, with the 2 junior officers falling in behind them like an honor guard, Webb was left standing in the Chen corridor, reading the dedication plaque properly for the first time in 3 years. The brass plate was polished and well maintained, indicating the respect the Pentagon staff held for the man it honored. He had walked past this plaque thousands of times over 3 years, probably tens of thousands of times, and never truly read it, never understood what it represented, never bothered to wonder why a corridor would be named after someone, or what that person must have done to deserve such recognition. The story of what happened spread quickly through Pentagon security channels with the viral speed of a truly educational mistake. Within hours, every security contractor and Pentagon police officer in the building had heard some version of the story. By the next day, it had reached other military installations. Webb became the example used in training sessions, the cautionary tale about the importance of knowing building history and recognizing significant persons. His name became synonymous with a particular type of security overreach. More importantly, security personnel throughout the Pentagon began actually reading the dedication plaques scattered throughout the building, learning about the engineers, military leaders, and civilians who had shaped the facility. They learned about General Leslie Groves, who had supervised the Pentagon's original construction in the 1940s. They learned about the workers who had died during construction. They learned about the victims of 9/11 whose names were inscribed in memorial corridors. The building became less of an abstract structure and more of a living history lesson. David Chen continued his occasional visits to the Pentagon over the following years, and security personnel learned to recognize him on site, greeting him with appropriate respect while still maintaining professional protocols. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," became a common greeting in B-Ring, delivered with genuine warmth. Some of the younger officers would ask him questions about the building's history, and David was always happy to share stories about the renovation project, the challenges they had faced, the innovations they had pioneered. And Officer Marcus Webb, though not formally disciplined, carried the weight of his error as a permanent lesson about the danger of assumptions and the importance of respect for those who came before. He became, somewhat ironically, one of the most knowledgeable security officers about Pentagon history, making it his mission to ensure no one else made the same mistake he had. He gave informal tours to new security contractors, pointing out the dedication plaques and sharing the stories behind them. He never forgot the day he tried to remove David Chen from Chen Corridor, and he made sure everyone who worked with him learned from his mistake.